Hello, everybody. So I'm just going to give it a second to load. So my name is Kate. This is part four of my four-part series. Now, in the past, we've had some technology issues. So I'm just going to hang tight for a second and give you a little spiel while we wait for some people to filter in. And if it doesn't look like it's loading, I may restart it because we've had some issues in the other parts of people submitting questions and them not actually populating. Um, so it appears we have some people drifting in, which gives me hope that if you submit questions, they're going to pop up. Okay, so my name is Kate. I'm the founder of the Helios ACL project. I help ACL athletes through all stages of their recovery, and we have a big, exciting talk today. So I think most people have heard that, the mental part of ACL recovery is the hardest. And I would say, honestly, it's like 50% of your recovery is that mental piece. Yet, I see it in the group, I see it online, Instagram. It's all about the physical pieces. And although those are very important, if we're neglecting 50% of our recovery, then we're not getting as good care as we should, and maybe not getting to that optimal level that we want to after your ACL surgery, whether you got surgery or not, right? After that injury. So today's talk is addressing all of those pieces. Now, I feel like as far as where the attention gets put, I think a lot of times it's more oriented to the return to sport phase. But that's only a small chunk, right? We have all, from pre-surgery all the way till month 6. That's not considered the return to sport phase. So I think that this conversation needs to be had to, one, give you guys some tools, no matter what part of your recovery you're in, to address your mental game, and set realistic expectations that are going to help you stay positive and help you feel more in control of your journey. So to start off, I think I consider there to be really 5 stages of ACL recovery. If you're getting surgery, there's the pre-surgery phase, there is the early stages, the mid stages, the late phases, and then the return to performance phase. And that is all a continuum that can take, more than 2 years depending on when you get your surgery. And the return to performance phase, can go on for a very long time. So I think we need to be talking about mentally what you can be doing in all of these phases and setting realistic expectations for yourself. So let's start from the beginning. So in the early pre-surgery phase, let's say, I think that people don't let themselves experience the grief of what has happened, and I think that leads to a lot of avoidance behavior. So first and foremost, as far as like mental strategies go, let yourself experience the grief of it. Let yourself feel that sadness, because you don't have to start moving on to your like next action steps, like finding a physical therapist, getting started with prehab. You don't have to start that the second you get injured, right? Give yourself some grace here and actually experience those emotions. So yes, what does experiencing really mean? I think it means a couple different things. So for one, I think it's important to label your emotions. Now, I gave a talk on mental agility, I think in December, in this group, which you could still get access to. So I'm going to keep it a little bit less tactical today and more, overarching ideas of what you should be doing. So without getting too deep into like the pieces of how you do this, you're going to be labeling your emotions. So we have this place in our brain called the amygdala, which is where we experience our emotions. Awesome. I just saw one of the comments pop up. So I'm going to be answering Q&A stuff later on, but I will try to respond to things if they're pertinent to what I'm talking about or you feel like you need more clarity. So our amygdala is where we experience emotions, right? That's when you feel the physiological signs of them. So you might feel shaking, you might feel anxiety, your heart beating. when we label our emotions, it actually brings them to the frontal part of our brain where we can actually like consciously process them. So even if you're not at a place where you feel like you're made peace with it yet, even just saying like, this sucks and I feel this is so unfair, this happened to me, is helpful. So that's kind of what I mean by processing. Now, I always like, there's a big bit of grief that goes into having an injury like this because you kind of know that the next year is going to look way different than you planned. You're going to have to devote a lot of time to this recovery, and it's okay to feel those emotions. Okay, so as far as like the pre surgery, one, feeling it, two, accepting that it's going to change your next year's trajectory and maybe separating yourself from the activities that are meaningful for you is a big, even milestone to just get there. So, as far as, pre surgery, setting the expectation that, you're committed to this, that it's okay, or how it's not your fault that it happened. You couldn't prevent it, but now taking the step into I own it, where it's my responsibility to fix it. That's like the biggest overarching thing that you should take through the rest of your recovery too. It's not my fault that it happened, but it's my responsibility to fix it. So you're going to fix it by, one, being really compliant with your rehab, even when things go astray, right? And making sure that you find things that bring you joy throughout this is going to help you stay on that path. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but we're going to get to there as we move on. Okay, so as far as pre-surgery, I feel like that sums most of it up. Is if anyone has like specific things they're struggling with or that they have questions on, please drop them below because I'd love to elaborate if you feel like you need it. But we have a whole bunch of other stages to get through, so I'm going to be moving on. So as far as the early stages, I think, one, setting realistic expectations for yourself, right? Understanding that you're going to be in a lot of pain. You're going to be, not as mobile as you're used to. So you might not, during this period, be able to take on as much in your, not just knee things, right? Everyday life. And giving yourself some grace for that, I think, is super important. You know, making peace with the fact you may have to ask for help from other people. And I know, being an independent person myself, like, I hate to ask for help, but it's okay. And it's good to do it because then it gives you time to heal more and it gives you the space to heal, which is super key. I would say at this point, setting really small goals is super duper important because throughout your first, let's say, 8 weeks or so, you're going to see a lot of improvement really quickly. So, setting small goals and setting a weekly goal is going to help you stay on track. So, what I mean by a weekly goal is not by the end of week one, I'll be walking without crutches. That's not quite what I'm talking about, right? That means I'm setting the goal that I want to keep a positive mind frame around what happens at PT. You can set like goals that are objective, but putting a timeline on them for each week probably is going to make you feel disappointed when you don't exactly reach that. So, process goals are going to be really key. So, a process goal is when, there's an outcome goal, which is like what you want to get, and a process goal is like how you're going to get it. So, I think I've definitely talked about this. Like by week 4, you want to have your knee straight and you want to have, it depends if you have a meniscus repair or not, but you want to have like at least 90 degrees of knee bend. If you didn't have an meniscus repair, you want to have a little bit more than that. So like that's our like what goal. Then our process goal is going to be like how we get to it. And I think this is the most key part to take with you throughout your entire recovery. But setting a weekly process goal from like day one can be have this amazing impact on your recovery because then you start focusing less on what I'm trying to get to, those like bigger goals, and you're focusing on the bits and pieces of like how to actually get to them, which is going to get you much farther. So like I'll give you an example, right? If my goal is that I want to hit my milestone of getting my full knee extension, my process goal for the week would be every day I'm going to do prone hang, which is like a long duration stretch to gain your knee straightening back. I'm going to do that every morning when I wake up for 5 minutes as I scroll on TikTok through Instagram, ACL, Facebook Recovery Club, answering questions. And that way, through the every day of the week, you're hitting that goal. And then you can celebrate that and say, yeah, I'm not exactly where I want to be just yet, but I did all the steps and all the things I could to start that. And and if I do that consecutively, then I'll get to my what goal, my outcome goal. So process-based goals can be really instrumental, especially once you're kind of leaving that early stage and going into the mid stage where progress happens a lot slower. Okay, so as far as questions on that, does anyone have questions on how they should be setting process goals? And we'll kind of go through different examples at different stages of recovery too, because I think that'll be a little helpful. Because I know not everyone is freshly post-op. Okay. Now, the other thing that I think could be very helpful in the early stages is understanding that you are going to have setbacks. It's not if they're going to happen, it's just when. So you might start to get excited, you start to progress, away from using your crutches, and your knee swells up a little bit because it's not ready, and you have to go back to a crutch. That understanding that that's the expectation you have, that you might go a little bit forward, a little bit back, as long as the general trend line is upward, can really help you not to really help to keep the inner conversation positive instead of, oh my God, I'm never going to get better. Those like absolutist statements can be really harmful to like the mental pieces of this, right? Understanding that it's going to go forward, it's going to go back, it's going to go forward, 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 and a little bit back. And that's okay. So just understanding that this process looks so different for everyone, even from day one, right? Everyone's coming into this with different levels of strength, different severity of injury. Maybe you had an autograft and they had to remove a piece of your tendon to make your new ACL. So everyone's coming into this on an absolutely different level, and you're not going to recover at the same rate as even maybe the person that got the same exact surgery as you the same day. It's going to look a little bit different. Okay, so understanding that from day one is going to help all the rest. Now, as far as the mid stages, right? I think of the mid stage as being kind of this, you get into this almost like purgatory space where in the beginning you were getting better a lot faster, or it seems like that. And then it starts to slow down where now you can do a lot of stuff, but you can't quite do it to the capacity you want. And maybe you can run yet, maybe you can't, but still the progress just goes slower. And I think sometimes that makes people feel like, oh my God, I'm not making progress. So if you're feeling that, some questions I would ask yourself are, what data do I have to prove that I'm not making progress? And think about everything that happened in the past week, right? And this kind of comes back to making goals that are not just outcome based, because if you try to tackle the whole thing at once, it might feel like you're not making progress. But if your goals are process based, then you're going to say, well, I did make a little progress towards it. Maybe you're doing heel slides to get your full range of motion. It felt not as hard today. It felt a little bit less hard. I had less resistance to go and do it because I had already just made up my mind that I was going to go do it because it was my process goal for the week. So doing that is super helpful to keep the progress up. Exactly, Alexandra, baby steps. Now, making process goals also make the uncontrollables more controllable, which helps manage your anxiety. And I think that is like really the utility, because there's going to be so many things throughout this journey that you feel are out of your control, and you can control how you show up. That is pretty much the only thing you can control throughout this journey, right? Sometimes our knee disagrees with us, sometimes it flares up, and understanding that I have some power in this is super helpful to keeping a positive mindset. I just saw one of the questions. Is there any advice on 6+ months after surgery when one is cleared from PT but still not fully trust their leg yet. Yes, we are going to go to that next. Before we jump into that, has anyone heard of the ACL RSI? If you haven't, the ACL RSI is a questionnaire that measures mental readiness. So we have some non-objective mindset things that I want you guys to be implementing to help with your recovery. But then there's also some objective things where we can actually kind of measure this. So it asks questions like, how confident do you feel doing activities that are similar to your sport? And I think this might surprise you guys that people, even at 4 months out, people that test below 56%, and like the studies vary, so it's like I think the window is like 56 to 62%, underneath that, have a significantly decreased rate of successfully returning to sports after, within 2 years of their injury. So I'm just going to break that down one more time. So if you're scoring low on knee confidence, it decreases the likelihood that you will make it to your goal activity within the next 2 years. And I know what you're probably thinking, Kate, but people don't return to sports at 4 months, or they shouldn't. So why does that matter? And this is multifactorial, right? But return to sport readiness is comprised of a couple different dimensions. So one is going to be cognitive appraisals, like how you feel with your relationship with your body, which includes confidence, expectations, your motivations. The other is your affective components. So like how much anxiety you have about your knee. And some of that kind of makes sense because if you hurt your knee pretty bad, you'd be anxious about moving in ways you're not ready for in the future. The other is behavioral. So do you avoid things you're afraid of? So even at 4 months out, we kind of start to get a picture in this like mid stage of how you're feeling about your knee. Now, sometimes the mental piece of this is different than how you physically present. So I kind of see two cases happen. One where someone is, maybe physically they're not really ready, but for some reason they're just super duper confident. That's equally not as good as if you actually are physically like really doing well, but you still don't feel confident. So both of those situations happen and both of them need to be addressed. And that's why we're assessing to see, is there a mismatch? Now, the cool thing is, right, you can work on some of this stuff and test at a higher confidence bracket. And that means you have a higher chance of returning. So taking these objective measurements are like really, really important because it gives you a glimpse into how you feel about your knee in a way that's like objective. Now, this is kind of where we're getting into the weeds about like the return to sport phase. So I want to take a second and just backtrack for a second. So we're talking around 4 months. So around 4 months, most people are running. It depends if you had a meniscus repair too. And if you haven't watched my live on returning to running, go watch that and come back because this is going to be a replay. When people are asked to do something that they don't feel ready for, it's going to decrease your confidence, right? I mean, it makes sense. So a big piece of this is testing to make sure or assessing your physical function in order to give you increased confidence. So it kind of goes both ways. Like, yes, you need to be confident, but why would you feel confident about something you haven't done before? So it's almost like the assessment and the doing the like questionnaires are just to give you a sense of like how do I actually feel? And then the physical function pieces let you know that how I feel was right. So I think that's why the testing pieces are so important because it does help with the mental pieces. If that's unclear, I can elaborate. Okay, so I think I'm going to answer this question now because I think it's pretty pertinent to what we're talking about. So is there any advice for someone that is 6+ months post-surgery when one is cleared from PT, however, does not fully trust their leg yet? Okay, so there's two pieces to this. You know, were you cleared from physical therapy because you had reached your goals or your insurance had cut you off? And if you're somewhere that doesn't take insurance, were you cleared based off of what you could do or the fact you got to your goals with confidence? Usually, it's because insurance cuts people off, not because they're physically ready. So there's two pieces to this. One, if you're not physically ready yet, you know, you're not gonna feel confident. So in order for you to get back to a place where you could achieve your goals, that physical piece does need to be there. And it just means that maybe you weren't there yet. Okay, I was cleared because I reached my goals based on my surgeon. Okay, what are your goals? Not your surgeon's goals. I'll give you a second to type. Still waiting. So I'm going to give an example of one of the athletes I had worked with. So she was cleared for physical therapy from physical therapy, but she, when they did the hop testing, she tested at like 80% to be able to hike and jog. Okay. Were your surgeon's goals for you more range of motion based? You could just drop that down below. So she was cleared from physical therapy and she didn't feel 100% confident in her knee in order to return to skiing. So when we actually tested her strength was much, much, much lower than she had been told because she had never been tested. So if I was looking at that at face value, like, oh, you're cleared, you should be fine, it's all in your head. But sometimes there is a physical piece which makes you feel less confident because you kind of know what your muscles can do, right? Like think about if you were running really fast, had to stop, how would that feel on your knee? Like would that be something you were ready for? Um, and most of the times, if the answer is no, then there is still a physical puzzle piece missing, and that needs to be addressed in addition to the mental stuff. So it kind of goes hand in hand. So my advice would be, you know, get tested, strength tested. And then the other piece would be, looking at your goal activities. If you can't jog yet, that's a pretty lower, not lower level, but that's something that should have been covered in your rehab now. Um, so I would definitely do some investigation as to like why you can't do that yet. Okay, strengthen. Got you. Okay, so it looks like maybe just some rocks weren't turned over just yet. And the goal of this conversation isn't necessarily to, I'm sorry if I'm throwing you off now and saying your physical journey is just not done yet. But that appears to be what it looks like, in my opinion. I don't feel like you mentally I don't feel like you're wrong in your assertion. Like, I want you to feel confident because you are so sure that your knee is ready. And that's the distinction we need to make here. So, in this talk today, moving forward towards the like return to sport conversation, I'm going to be really focusing on people who are physically ready but mentally don't feel like they're there yet. Because, if the issue is that you're not physically strong enough, then it's not your fault you feel like that, right? And that needs to be addressed before you can move forward and feel confident hiking, jogging. So definitely follow up with me in the DMs afterwards, and we can have that conversation as well. But fantastic question to bring to the table. Okay, so I had some notes here of other things I wanted to talk about because I tend to go on tangents. Okay, so one of the biggest things that I think, you know, mentally, or expectations that people maybe have an incorrect expectation of, is heading into the return to sport phase. And at the point which they start their sport, they think that once they go back, they'll be at 100%. And that would be really, really cool if we can make that true for everyone. But the issue is your first season back, you're not going to feel you're not going to feel 100% confidence until you go for that, let's say soccer, you go for that slide tackle and your knee holds up just fine, right? And even within that, you may progress to a point where you feel like 99.9% there. Then something happens that kind of brings your confidence down a little bit, meaning you feel a little tweak in your knee and you're not sure if it means something or not. And I think that's actually normal, right? And ideally, you're physically ready here, right? So confidence is kind of has like a wave form, right? So you're not going to feel at your peak confidence all the time. It's going to fluctuate. And just giving yourself some grace for that, I think could be really, really helpful in terms of feeling like you're heading in the right direction. And the feeling of heading in the right direction helps to continuously bring that confidence up versus having that absolutist thought that like, oh, I'll never be back. I'll never do it. Um, so that's a big expectation and mindset piece that I think is really important heading into that. My PT had the mental talk with me this past Monday and it helped. Fantastic. And this is something that absolutely should be addressed with your physical therapist and person helping you throughout your journey. Um, and the fact that it's not, I think, contributes to people having expectations that are unrealistic, feeling disappointed. And if they're avoiding it, can also lead to re-tears. If you're avoiding behaviors that might be useful for you to work on in your sport, whether it be, I know Alexandra is a Zumba instructor. So if you're avoiding things that you're nervous about completely, heading into a place where you're going to be teaching classes, that could be really detrimental, right? So it's all about, when we talk about how do you then become confident, I think you could break it down into, doing graded exposure and having continuous functional testing. Because the testing is going to tell yourself there's not a mismatch, right? I can perform. And the graded exposure means you don't do too much too soon or get yourself in a situation that you're not ready for. So, like what it looks like in a sport example, we'll use soccer as the example, is that you're not heading into full contact play if you haven't done whatever the timeline we decide, but let's say for example 2 weeks, if you haven't done non-contact for 2 weeks with no issues, then you move on to maybe some you know scrimmaging, but you're not going for those tackles, you're not going head to head with other players. So it's this stepwise thing that step by step tells you, you can do it and you are ready. And that pretty much, as far as what I came here to talk about today, pretty much covers, the whole journey from the beginning to the end. Um, so just to give you guys some takeaways before we head into the Q&A, because I do have one pre-submitted question that I think is a really good one. But if anyone else has questions, please feel free to drop them below. So some takeaways, right? Experience your emotions, don't avoid them. Label your emotions, let them come with you on the journey instead of avoiding them. Set realistic expectations for yourself by setting process goals, not just outcome goals, although it's good to have both. I'd recommend writing them down every single week so that you stay in the mind frame of I am doing the controllables, and the uncontrollables, although they may happen, I still can control how I show up every single day to every single rehab session, right? When you are starting to progress, understanding that you may slide forward, you may slide backward, and your performance may vary. But once again, you can control how you show up for yourself, and that is okay. If some days you don't feel like you did a week ago, it's going to happen. You're going to have setbacks, and that's okay. The other piece of this is understanding that everyone's bodies heal differently on a different timeline, and just because someone else that you see in your clinic is progressing faster than you doesn't mean anything you're doing is wrong. You're just a human being, and every human body heals differently. As far as getting tested, I think it's important to be assessing both your mental readiness and your physical function because both of those things are going to give you more confidence that you're doing the right stuff and progressively heading in the right direction. Let's see. I think that was pretty much it. Now, if you're someone just worth noting, if you're someone that is struggling mentally, right, because you are isolated from your normal life and your normal routine, there's a couple of things I would recommend. One, if you need to, obviously talk to a psychologist because I could talk to you all day long about some of the tactical pieces of getting your confidence back when returning to sport, but everyone has different beliefs around pain and different support systems. So if you need extra support, please seek out it doesn't even have to be a sports psychologist, but a sports psychologist probably would be best to make sure you're having enough support. I would say keep your support squad around you. So if that's friends, like go out to dinner with your friends. Make sure you're talking to them about your feelings and your problems. That way you feel supported throughout this whole entire journey. And that's the spiel, guys. So I had a really great submitted question, and it was how. Oh, I just want to read this before I think also not to let outsiders pressure you into just doing things you aren't confident or ready for yet. Ease into things. Excellent point, right? You know your body. You have a feeling of where you're at, right? Don't let anyone tell you that you should just get over it and jump into something because there's always a way to break it down into an even smaller step so that you can feel confident in what you're doing and not letting any outside pressures get to you. I think this is true a lot of times. I see this with kids returning to sports. Their coaches or teammates are pressuring them, and if you don't feel ready yet, don't do it, right? Because it's not going to magically go away, that feeling, and you have it for a reason. Okay, so this is, I thought, such a great question. How do I stop replaying my injury in my head? Massive question. Okay, so there's a couple different pieces to this. I think the nature of the injury. All injuries are traumatic no matter what. Some are a little bit more traumatic. That could be because of how it happened. Maybe you did something a little stupid and that resulted in your injury, or it was something absolutely out of your control and that's making you spin your wheels a little bit. So I don't think there's one approach that works for everyone, but I have implemented this with athletes I work with, and it's been kind of successful. So I thought I would share it with you. So we do something called past, present, future. So whenever a intrusive thought pops into your head, in this instance, it's replaying your ACL injury in your head. I think even just labeling it past helps snap you out of it. Now, it's not going to decrease the frequency which it happens, but the goal is to make yourself notice when you're thinking of something that happened in the past versus what your present is versus what your future is. So you could be thinking of, a future re-injury, something like that. You say future. And remember how I talked about how labeling your emotions takes it away from the amygdala, I can't talk, away from the amygdala and brings it to the more frontal parts of your lobe where the conscious thoughts happen. So our goal with this is that we're taking it from the feel center, taking it from being out of our control, and we're saying, hey, that's a past thought that actually it doesn't matter for right now. And I've found that that has actually been really helpful in people at least reorienting away from their thought. And here's the thing, as you move forward throughout this journey, those feelings, those memories are going to have less power on you, especially as you see yourself grow and expand more and, move away from a place of this injury still has me to I'm getting back to my life and feeling more normal. I think I've mentioned this before, but the goal isn't to get necessarily rid of your fear. Is to shrink it down so it's bite-sized enough you could put it in your pocket and move forward despite it. Over time, it becomes less and less and less as long as you're doing the mental work you need to in order to move past it. And that's all the submitted questions for today. So if anyone, I'll hang out for one more minute. If anyone wants to drop a question, I'll be looking for it. But great feedback, great questions today, guys. I had so much fun. This is the end of the 4-part series. If you guys have any other things you want me to do lives on, I'm happy to come on literally every week if you want me to. But you could just DM me either on Facebook. I'm the Helios ACL Project on Instagram. And if you're looking for someone to help you through your ACL journey, all parts of it, I'm here to help. So shoot me a DM and let's get you back to your thing. All right. Bye, guys.